Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Knowledge Group webcast, where we'll be discussing storage and backup security, the final frontier, taking a look at the threat landscape, industry readiness, and offering some practical advice. My name is Andy McLeod, your moderator for today's program. We'll hand things over to our speakers in a very brief moment. Just want to quickly point out over the next few slides, you will see some information about our participants, their firm, and answers to some of our most frequently asked questions. Now, if you are viewing today's webcast with PC or Mac, you'll see the events chat window on the right-hand side of your screen with that information displayed there as well. You'll also see the Q&A tab to click to submit a question to our speakers for our question and answer session towards the end of today's webcast. You'll also see in the handouts tab a white paper ready for download that's been provided by our speakers as well. During today's webcast, we will be asking you a couple of polling questions as well, and the information about those can be found under the polls tab. And when the time comes to enter your answer, just click the answer and hit the blue button, and we'll be able to see those. Feedback is completely anonymous, but we will be able to see how you've answered on screen, but we'll cover that when we get to it. In the event of any technical issues, we suggest refreshing the event page. If those continue, there is some alternate connection information included in your reminder email we sent out earlier today. Any other questions, concerns, you can reach the team via email. The address you need is info@theknowledgegroup.org. We also have the live chat service on the website if you do need urgent support. The website itself is a great way to see the certificates you've earned, continuing education requirements, and more, but you can do that with our Knowledge Group app as well for iOS and for Android. Finally, if you are collecting continuing education credit from today's webcast, you just need to click the blue continuing education credit button on the event homepage. Enter the 3 secret words that I'll be reading during today's presentation, and that serves as your proof of attendance mandated by state bars and boards. We also include a feedback quiz on the event homepage as well, where you can let us know what you think of the Knowledge Group so we can make the best use of your time at future Knowledge Group webcasts. So without further ado, I want to take a brief moment to thank today's sponsor firm Continuity. Their information on screen now, but I also want to extend the Knowledge Group's thanks to today's speakers, as well as our attendees tuning in both live and on demand. So let's introduce today's panelists. Leading us off today, we'll be hearing from Doron Pennas, a Chief Technology Officer over at Continuity, where Doron is an avid storage and backup security advocate and one of the 2 authors of the recently published NIST special publication titled Security Guidelines for Storage Infrastructure, alongside continuous research of storage security, as well as the threat landscape and market maturity analysis. He's also engaged in writing, public speaking, and information exchange with leading global organizations. And prior to joining the firm, he was with Expert Integrated Systems, a leading Israeli SI, leading its business continuity solutions division for over 7 years. Before that, he served in the Israeli Defense Force for 10 years, developing IT infrastructure management methodologies and retiring with the rank of Major. And he has over 20 years of expertise when it comes to data storage, management, mission critical computing, apologies for the audio issue there, as well as operating system design and development, as well as cloud computing and networking architecture to boot. We're also joined by Doron Youngerwood, the VP of Marketing over at Continuity. His information is on screen now, where he's a results-driven tech marketing leader with a successful track record when it comes to managing and growing marketing teams, along with in-depth knowledge and proven success in the main pillars of marketing, go-to-market strategies, digital gen, and digital and brand as well. So we're going to turn things over to Doron at the moment on slide number 9 of the materials. Before we do, I'll give that first secret word of the day. So data is a timely first secret word. That's D-A-T-A, secret word number 1 of 3. But for now, slide number 9 is on screen. Doron, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And just to confuse you, there are 2 presenters, both with the names of Doron. So we will refer to ourselves as Doron Y and Doron P. All right, great. Thanks everyone for joining us. Let me dive straight into the agenda. Thank you, Andy, for setting some context. So a lot to talk about and a very dramatic title, Securing Storage and Backup, the Final Frontier. So we have a jam-packed agenda that is both practical, and we're going to arm you with some really practical advice and tips, but also making sure it's interactive. We have some polls that we're going to be asking everyone throughout the course of the event. And please, if you have any questions, just use the question tab throughout the event. So the event is basically divided into 2 sessions. Part 1 is we're going to go straight into some fundamentals of storage and backup security. And we're going to address 3 of the most common myths that we hear about the need to secure storage and backup. And we'll give you some practical examples. And then part 2, we're going to talk about the state of the industry. We're going to give you a sneak peek into some findings from the industry's first storage and backup security report that was published a week and a half ago. I'll give you some highlights of the report. And then at the end, we're going to arm you with some practical advice, some recommendations, and also some resources of where to go tomorrow morning to enhance your existing security strategy. All right, let me dive in and give you a context, a bit of a bird's eye view as to what we're seeing today, the big picture. So current trends, well, as data-focused attacks are growing in number. I think we've all seen it. They're growing in number and they're growing in sophistication. And more industry focus on the need to protect storage and protect backup. And we're seeing it from conversations that we're having with organizations, as well as analyst firms as well. And so, in fact, last month, there was an article in Threat Post. So if we can move up to the next slide. Threat Post, and yeah, there we go. Last month talked about this new tactic that we're seeing by attackers, focusing on storage and backup environments. And we'll address a bit later on why that is. But it's also the likes of Gartner, who are now realizing that organizations need to step up their own cybersecurity strategies by focusing on protecting the storage devices and backup environment as well. And third and final area, of course, we've all read about and a lot of articles about the White House executive order. It's great that the US government is taking a stance, and we're now seeing other governments also jumping on the bandwagon when it comes to cybersecurity protection. But not only that, in many conversations that we've had with a number of large organizations, both within the financial services and banking sector, but also within the healthcare sector as well, they've mentioned numerous times new audits that are focusing on storage and backup. And that's something that's fairly new in the past 9 months or so. So these are the things that have been happening over the past year or so. And that kind of sets a context. Now, I want to ask Doron, Pinchas, how do we get to this position in the first place? Why is there such a new focus on data? Why is it being targeted?
Right, thanks. So, by the way, to my team, I kind of hear an echo when I speak. I'll try to manage, but if there's a way to sort it out, that will help. So let's take a step back and review the value of business data. And for this purpose, I'd like to define the business value as what will be detracted for your company's worth should the data be deleted. Okay, and so it depends on the type of your business, right? So if you're the British Museum and you have the famous digital tour, the online work of art catalog, which you probably spent tens of millions of dollars to create, what will happen if that's taken away? Well, most likely not too much, right? Because most of the value of the museum lies in the works of art themselves. But if you're a different type of business, say a digital currency company, most likely it will impact the value much more significantly. And of course, if you're a traditional bank or any other type of business, the percentage may vary. What we can agree on is that the value of data grows year over year. And with that in mind, I want to draw your attention to the fact that while the data is growing, attacks are also proliferating, and a very large number of attacks is succeeding. It's succeeding even to the point where organizations prefer to pay the ransom, right? So why is that? Are we missing something? Are our practices lacking? And is there something we can do about it? And in order to dive more neatly into those topics, we'd like to run a couple of polls.
Yes, indeed. All right. So poll number one, and Andy, if you can bring that up. Poll number one, in fact, yeah, Doron, do you want to move to the next slide? And we'll just show the next heading. There we go. Poll number one, if you can bring that up, Andy, there we go. Weighing the business value and risk. Are your security controls adequate? And there's 5 options to choose from. Yes, absolutely. Yes, somewhat. No, but it's fine for now. No, not at all, or I don't know. And so we'll give everyone perhaps 20 seconds or so to fill in the answers. But again, weighing the business value and risk, and based on what Doron Pinchas just mentioned, are your security controls adequate? All right, so I can see, there we go. Okay, I can see the answers coming through. So still early days, but so far, over half of you said yes, absolutely. That's great. It's a good amount of confidence. A third said yes, somewhat. No, but it's fine for now, about 18%, still changing. Okay, the numbers have certainly changed now. Okay, so 42% said yes, absolutely, and another 42% said yes, somewhat. So, Doron, based on the numbers so far, and I'm sure that will change over the next minute or so. Are you surprised by that?
Not much, I should say.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool.
But we do hope to dispel some of the confidence, and we'd love for you to reconsider if you've taken into account all possible angles.
All right. And that ties in nicely to the next poll. So poll number 2, there we go. Do you have a clear understanding of the threats and risks? 3 possible answers: yes, no, or not sure. And again, the poll will remain on the side of your panel, your control panel. You'll see that throughout. I can see many of you have answered that so far, but again, we'll give everyone another 20 seconds or so to answer the question. Do you have a clear understanding of the threats and the risks? Okay, so far, I know the numbers are going to continue changing, but so far we see 27% of you said yes, 18% said no, and just over half, 55%, said not sure. And again, Doron, any thoughts on that? Or was it too soon?
I probably spoke too soon. I might have scared the audience. Okay, let's take it and for now, and let's revisit those answers later. Wonderful. So here is our first attempt to try to maybe dive into the gap in between the required level of protection we need for our data and the actual risks that we see out there when ransomware attacks succeed and other data-related attacks do succeed. So when you first take a look into the technological landscape, things looks pretty simple. We have data on the left, data consumers on the right, whether these are servers or users or applications, and a set of services in between. And so 2 questions come to mind. The first is, what can go wrong? And the other, how? Let's tackle them one by the other. So we all know that data can be stolen and data can be held ransom. That's a given with the current news stream we get. But data can also suffer from other unappetizing options. So data can also be destroyed without any demand for ransom. If you look up some 18 months ago, a medium-sized email provider by the name of VF Email suffered an attack in which data was deleted and no ransom demand was made. By the way, they couldn't restore the data, so they lost about 12 years of 15 million subscribers' data. This is characterizes nation-state attacks, hacktivists, cyber terrorists, and you should think about what might happen if there is no option to pay a ransom, because a lot of the victims today do choose that path. Now, another unappetizing option is for attackers to clone your environment. Storage services provide disks to virtual machines and servers. They boot off those. By cloning those devices, I can basically create copies of your environments and stand them up within a sandbox in your own test environment, which is not necessarily scrutinized for security as other environments, or maybe take the environment completely out. Imagine I can take your Active Directory servers, your critical financial record servers, and stand them up somewhere for inspection. Now, another risk is storage denial of service. And it's not talked about too much, but we've seen that happen. Storage services rely on very accurate configuration. And it's enough to have an outdated firmware driver on one of the clients to basically bring down an entire storage array to a standstill. Now, a storage array can serve thousands of servers. Imagine that as an attacker, I got access to some of your servers, and every now and a while, I'm just swapping the drivers to older versions and cripple your environments for days on end. These are very, very tough situations to pinpoint technically. And then finally, there is the opportunity to actually change the data. If I manage to get access to your data plane and I can map the devices used by your servers and databases to store data, there's the opportunity for me to actually change the data without actually leaving any trace. I don't have to install anything on your servers. I don't have to traverse or hijack any packets on the network. So that's a very, very serious threat. And we'll revisit that on the following slides. Now, the way these are done is through multiple vulnerabilities, options, and attack vectors the storage environment provides. So data can be attacked at rest, as we move devices about, as we install software. It can be attacked in motion as it traverses across IP networks or fiber channel networks. The storage service itself might be the target of attack. And we should remember that storage can be controlled through a very wide array of means. Storage have APIs, and storage devices trust other components in an environment. For example, a hypervisor can tell the array to create or destroy LANs. So there is trust relationship. Tools control each other, backups and storage talk to each other. So there is an ample opportunity to have direct access to our storage service and inflict damage. Now, data can also be tampered through exploits within the service itself. Not everyone we speak with initially realizes that storage devices also have CVEs, just like servers and OS and software products. And you should know that most existing vulnerability management tools do not really detect misconfiguration and missing updates and patches to the actual storage components. And finally, the consumers can be attacked by being able to get access to a client being backed up. I can potentially influence the backup software. By inflicting the end user device of a user, I can potentially try to control the storage. So there is quite a wide range of options to get in. And in the next part, what we'd love to do is to revisit some common misconceptions that can be quite detrimental. So the first objections that comes to mind to a lot of people we speak with is that storage is very, very obscure. There is a very small number of experts and individuals who can actually get access there. So practically, why should we bother taking too much trouble to secure the layer? And this is very, very far from the truth. So first of all, storage is documented online. You can register to online courses. You can download simulators of the most high-end gear, and within a single afternoon, set up your own lab and get certified. And there is a very large number of ways in which an attacker can get in. So let's take one elaborate example, and then I'll mention a couple of other options. And the first thing to come to mind is that storage is managed by storage experts. And these are subject to social engineering, right? So I can search your LinkedIn or the LinkedIn environment and look for the storage experts within your environments. And let's say I find Jeff, who manages whatever, Dell or NetApp or Pure or any other fabulous vendor's storage. And then I find out Frank, who is the vendor sales engineer that actually corresponds with Jeff, and maybe they have been exchanging some notions about the difficulty of reporting storage capacities, which is, by the way, a true problem. And now I need to forward a message from Frank to Joe. Hey, Joe, here's an internal tool we use very successfully for the last quarter. You may want to check it out. It will help you report on storage. Here's the download link for Dropbox. Or here's an invite to our coming Orlando event. And if he falls prey to that promise or link, we now find ourselves inside the compute environment of your storage admin. So now by browsing the browser history, we can find the URLs for your storage management consoles. Perhaps you didn't harden the access to the storage console. Maybe the default passwords are still available. Maybe session cookies have not been cleared. Maybe session timeouts have not been deployed. And from here, we can start directly controlling the storage device. Now, there are other options, by the way. So in many cases, storage arrays allow clients to issue commands for the array through the data channel. You really need to disable it or limit or restrict it to only what's needed in order to prevent it. In many environments, we find that even storage admins are not completely aware of this option or its risks. So just a couple of weeks back, we've scanned a financial service environment, and it turns out that DMZ servers that were actually using the same storage arrays as backend servers, so those DMZ servers had access through the fiber links, and they could issue commands to the storage array to clone, copy, map, or destroy LUNs, which are storage volumes, that are provisioned to backend servers. So you really need to figure out what your APIs allow. It's also possible to get into storage systems through the vendor support network. A lot of the organizations we work with will claim that they have disabled all of those options. In reality, many are enabled. As an attacker, I can potentially impersonate the update servers and make sure that my own custom code is running on your servers. So obviously, in order to prevent the storage being accessed, there is lots and lots you can do. And we'll share some links later on. But you should definitely disable default passwords and limit roles and restrict them and enable two-factor authentication for critical devices or activities and so on. Now to the next myth. A lot of customers of ours will tell us that we've invested in backup, we're pretty confident we can recover. Isn't it enough? And so the reality is that backup environments are typically more complex than people envision. They usually think about those pieces of software that write data to tape, and then you take them offsite. These particular mechanisms are notoriously slow. So usually in an environment, you'll find multiple tiers. The first line of defense are storage-based snapshots that you can restore in virtually seconds. But then guess what? An attacker that gets access to your storage plane can ask the storage array to delete the snapshots. And that's exactly what hackers will do. The second line of defense are replicas, copies an array or a file server ships to a remote site that you can, in theory, use to recover data quickly or even stand up the application on the other side. These take not seconds, but rather minutes. And again, in many cases, the admin role provides complete access both to the production volumes and to the replicas. Important principle that will help you separate those is to use different roles, and maybe even restrict the activities you can do on replicas to require much higher level of authentication authorization. Let's say enable MFA authentication to actually initiate those commands. But these are hardly exercised. Now, the last line of defense is the actual backup systems themselves, which, as we mentioned, are very, very slow. But in a very large number of organizations, the same admin roles that can access storage also have the ability to access the backup systems. And even if you have secured them and separated the roles, there are many ways to actually tamper the activity of the backup tool itself. Even if you use immutable storage, right, to write the backups to, and in theory, hackers cannot even delete it, there is a strategy called poisoning, which allows the end user or the attacker to actually change the configuration of your backup clients and gradually swap the content of backed up data with rubbish. So within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you no longer have any current copies of the backup. There is a video on our site that actually shows how it's done and what you need to do to protect against it. Now, the final consideration we hear is that my organization invested a lot in auditing and monitoring. We have very intelligent event correlation tools, and we can probably detect attack in motion to pretty much any device in the perimeter and in the backend. And our question here is, does it include storage? In most cases, we find that auditing and logging doesn't go nearly as detailed as it should as it relates to storage. So for example, if I'm in the storage plane and I can ask the storage array to clone your boot devices for critical services to the lab, I can fire up VMs to inspect the content without any of your tripwiring tools seeing anything, because I'm not doing it through the actual OS, rather on a separate environment. If I'm still concerned, I can ask your backup software to create copies of those clone devices to your cloud environment and then take it from there. There was an interesting interview with a hacker that explained they actually use this technique to have your backup tools send cloud copies of data they wanted to inspect at their own leisure and then download from there. So intrusion detection tools and data leak prevention tools don't really notice any unusual traffic, right? And so if I also map your LANs from a critical database server to devices to change the data, the question is, will you know? Are you actually auditing activities such as mapping of devices to servers, deletion of snapshots, changes of policies? If you don't go to that level of detail, you actually allow attackers a very clear path to modify, destroy, and steal data without leaving any trace. So that's a very, very high-level primer into how attacks can happen. And as we see, this very short discussion reveals quite a number of different considerations you should take. There's definitely a lot you can do to reduce that risk by understanding how your environment looks, understanding what your APIs provide, what are the capabilities, what are the roles, and then figuring out how to restrict, control, and limit those capabilities. And from here, I want to jump to a slightly less technical area and talk a little about the industry state, as it were. And I'm referring those slides to Doron.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So Doron P, you want to get to the next slide. So yeah, we ran the industry's first report dedicated to understanding security of storage and backup infrastructure, as Doron mentioned. And this new research report basically provides an analysis of the vulnerabilities and misconfigurations of enterprise storage systems. And we compiled anonymized inputs from a fairly large number of storage risk assessments to give a unique insight into the state of storage security. And one of the really interesting findings from the report was, firstly, we detected 6,300 security issues, security risks. And what we also saw was an enterprise storage device has an average 15 vulnerabilities. And when you break that down, you see that out of that 15 vulnerabilities, 3 are considered high or critical risk. And that was really, really interesting, seeing those kind of numbers. Doron, do you want to maybe elaborate a bit on what were the guilty parties? What were the most frequent issues that we discovered?
Sure. So the report is not just a set of stats, as you may find in a lot of those publications. There is also an analysis section that goes into the top issues that were found in a very large number of the environments, and also a discussion of some of the less frequent yet extremely lethal issues that we found in selected environments. So they did include, for example, not really securing and closing legacy protocols, and that holds true both for IP protocols and fiber protocols. Ignoring CVEs simply because people assume their vulnerability management tools will find CVEs in the storage device level, which they don't. So you may be left with extremely exposed devices. Excessive access rights, we mentioned that earlier, not limiting roles to the point where an attacker can just, by resuming the role of a server admin, will also be able to attack backup and storage, and definitely lack of logging. From the more lethal side of things, we'd find things such as organizations that have invested in immutable storage or ransomware protection techniques and or technologies, but never activated them, or activated them in the wrong way, not following vendor recommendations. So in effect, they are rendered useless. We mentioned vulnerabilities which haven't been patched, trust relationships that were never documented or understood. For example, our hypervisor has full rights to delete Unix devices. Why is that? There is absolutely no need to do that. But leaving control options for environments that can do activities they shouldn't be able to do so on others. So these are some of the more lethal settings, and you can find a lot of discussion around what we found in the report. And it can actually be used. Maybe you can send a summary of those to your storage team and ask them how confident they are that your environment is actually free from those misconfigurations, and is it something that's out there on their radar? You might be surprised by the answers.
Fantastic. And by the way, Doron, you mentioned a really good point. That report that you see in front of you is on our website, but there's also a one-page kind of checklist that you can send over to the storage or backup team. That gives you a list of 8 different questions to ask, and that might be also a useful resource to arm yourself or your storage and backup teams with. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Over the past probably 9 months or so, we have interviewed 14 CISOs across different industries. And what you see in front of you is primarily from the banking and financial sector. And we wanted to understand what organizations are doing today. And the good news is that CISOs are now realizing that this is an area of focus for them and starting to address this as part of their strategies. We spoke to Mark about 6 months ago, who realized very early on that the necessity to secure the storage and storage management layer. And again, similar feedback from Erdal, who's a former CISO at Standard Chartered Bank. Going back to what Doron mentioned about the focus on data, and it's very, very clear whether you're a bank or a pharmaceutical company or a retailer, data is key here. And so being able to protect data is critical to be able to secure the storage and backup environments. And of course, also Sunil, the former head of security assessments, HSBC. So the good news is that we're now seeing a new realization amongst the CISOs that storage and the backup environments is an area to focus on, which is great. Moving on to the next slide, I want to, before I open up for the last poll, hopefully there's no fighting going on in your organization, but we want to understand what's holding organizations back. Is this an issue of general awareness of the importance of securing storage and backup? Is it just a matter of education and organizations are not aware of the need to secure storage and backup? Is it perhaps to do with technology limitations? Or is this about ownership and organizations perhaps not fully understanding who takes full responsibility of securing storage and backup? And so if you move on to the next slide, I want to open this up to everyone in the webinar for the final poll. There we go. And you should see that in front of you. The question is, who should own the security of your storage and backup systems? 5 options to choose from. Is it the security team? Is it perhaps the infrastructure team? Is it GRC? Or is it a shared responsibility? Or perhaps it's an other. And if you do select other, it would be great if you can add in the chat on the right-hand side your answer. So like the previous 2 polls, we'll give everyone 20 seconds or so to fill in your answers. But it'll be great to understand who within your organizations should own the security of your storage and backup systems. Now, it may not be correct today, but in an ideal world, who in your opinion should own it?
Thank you so much. And just while we're waiting for those responses to come in, I just want to quickly give our second secret word of the afternoon. Threat is our second secret word. That's THREAT. So be sure to answer the polling question there. Now, as Doran mentioned, you can enter, if you do hit other, you can mention what you mean in the Q&A chat there. You can also submit any questions for our question and answer session. But that's enough from me for now. We'll turn things back to Doran. Doran, back to you. Apologies for the interruption, but threat was that second secret word.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so the answers are coming in thick and fast. So the results so far, 42% said shared responsibility, 33% believe it should be the infrastructure team, and then 17% said GRC, and 8% said security. It's that's surprising to me. Doran, what do you think about that?
I'm not sure what to make of it. I don't think it's really surprising because we do hear quite a lot that it's a shared responsibility or it's the infrastructure's team responsibility. But what I would like to point out is the fact that in shared responsibility models, still the separation of duties should be extremely clear. And in my mind, InfoSec teams should define the requirements. They should sign off, or you should probably sign off as to what are the standards we expect. And then it's perfectly okay for the infrastructure team to make sure these are actually faithfully carried into your environment and report back. So I think that the mandate of InfoSec team is to define the minimum standards. It's not always sufficient to trust that to the infrastructure team, not because they don't care enough, simply because they don't have the mindset, they don't understand security to the required level of detail, they haven't been experts of security for years. Because of that premise we mentioned earlier, in which people think that storage is impenetrable, no one can really get there. So they really need your guidance, even if the actual implementation lies in the infrastructure team.
Great.
Perfect. So let's carry on. So in the next section, we'd like to paint a broad brush sketch where we discuss what can be done to improve the security posture. Realizing that a lot of organizations, as the survey we've presented shows, are not in a top shape. Realizing that some of the teams are not necessarily aware of all the delicate requirements of security. So it should come as no surprise that the process involves steps you probably are familiar with. I'm sure you've solved difficult new problems as they have arisen throughout the last decade or 2 decades. I think that the first step should be education. right? So we want to understand what are the capabilities of storage devices. What do we actually have, not just in theory, but in reality in our own environment? What vendors do we have? How their technologies are deployed? What is the setup of trust relationships, roles, responsibility? A very good start could be to engage your house consultant or hire some of the vendors you work with to conduct a quick and initial assessment of your storage and backup security posture. Make it a dedicated assessment because standard security vulnerability assessments don't pay sufficient attention to storage and backup. That will help you understand what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and you can focus your efforts in learning. We'll share some links that can be useful for you to get started, just I think on one of the next coming slides. Once you understand the lay of the land, what kind of storage technologies do we use, what are the capabilities they support, you should start defining what you envision as secure enough baselines and practices for that environment. And it needs to be detail-oriented because the storage environment is more complex than meets the eye, as we mentioned earlier. The attack surface is a little bit more convoluted. When you zoom into the storage environment, you'll find multiple techniques and components. And when you zoom in, you'll see that we have block and file and object storage and other technologies. And when you zoom in into each one, for example, the block storage service, you'll see that there is quite a number of possible components, arrays, fabrics, switches, virtualization appliances, and so on. And that they interact with the backup environment, and that there are quite a number of different APIs, management consoles, roles, trust relationships for each one of those. But you really need to want to go to that level of detail because that will help you formulate the correct baselines. So, for example, what kind of roles do we need? Do we want to separate admin roles for storage, for backup, for copies, for snapshots? What kind of controls do we want to have? What level of auditing do we expect? Once you define those baselines, it's much easier for the infrastructure team to make sure they are implemented and audited and monitored. So obviously, the next step would be to implement the controls. From our work with many organizations, the initial assessment or initial gap analysis, once you have those baselines in place, and by the way, it can be sped up through automation, takes some time. You'll start with a large list of deviations, but you'll need to iron them out. Implementing automation in performance those changes is key to rapid closure of the attack surface. And another practice we recommend is also build in KPIs and automatic measurements for those baselines to make sure you always meet them. And again, one of the things we've seen is that when you build enough automation, you not only have a much more secure environment, but you also have the opportunity to present to auditors the actual state of your storage environment much more easily. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very tedious task. And throughout any steps, any one of those steps, you may want to use your trusted vendors to make sure you've done things right. So as not to intimidate you, depending on the level of urgency, these processes usually takes several months to deploy, but if you're under stress, it can be done even in extremely large environments in under 6 weeks. So it's definitely a lot of work, but it's not infinite. And finally, as we promised some more resources, there is a special publication that has been prepared by NIST, and our friends at NIST asked us to join forces. So we helped co-author a guide that's titled Special Publication 800-209 that talks about storage security guidelines for storage infrastructure. And the document, in a very structured way, goes in much more detail through the possible risks and attack surfaces and provides suggestions on how you should build a framework for securing your storage and backup environments. But more than that, it also contains Chapter 4, which provides very extensive advice into how you can build security baselines for various aspects of storage and backup management. Some of them are very common to many other technologies like authorization and access control and version management and change management and so on. But some of them are actually unique to storage. For example, how to secure proprietary storage protocols, storage fabrics, NVMe over fiber, how to make sure you secure recovery of your data, how to make sure you secure archiving environments, and so on and so forth. And with that, I think we've concluded the more theoretical portion of today. There is a list here of resources, and we'll obviously share some more data following the event, where you'll get links to the surveys, links to the NIST guide, and to the slide deck. And before we go to the Q&A session, I want to make sure that my team here has something to add.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Sorry, Doron. Just before we do dive into some questions there, I just wanted to give our final secret word of the day. Security is secret word number 3. That's SECURITY. So with security being our third secret word, apologies, Doron, I appear to have cut you off there, so we'll turn back over to you.
No, I was just going to say, if there are any questions, so this is a great opportunity to ask your questions. Andy, I'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We've got some questions coming in, but there is still time to get your questions in as well, just using the Q&A tab that you'll see on screen there. This first question, it dropped in while you were both discussing the report, discussing the checklist, and you mentioned sending a checklist regarding security to your team. How often should one do this? Maybe once a quarter, once a year? How often should one be reviewing their existing security solution?
Should I take it, Doron? Right. So I think that we were referring to a very quick set of 5 to 10 questions. You may want to send them just to initially figure out where things stand. Right. So, for example, I'd imagine that your teams have response plans for various security incidents. Did they include events such as an attack on an entire storage array, a targeted attack on backup, securing the cloud copies that you take offsite from your on-premise environment? So there are some questions and cues, and once you send them to your teams, based on the answers, you'll hear the tune of it, and you'll figure out how well and how deeply they think of the different aspects. Now, it's also important, the other element of your question, to also have a schedule and organized process, whereas infrastructure teams report back to security teams on what's the actual states, what has changed. These should be done at least on a quarterly basis in our experience.
Thank you so much. And another question dropped in. It may have been addressed when you did discuss the report itself. It was just asking, when it comes to reviewing security, particularly for storage, what are the most common blind spots? So are there any common blind spots that you would imagine being spotted relatively soon? Any common pitfalls when it comes to reviewing security for storage?
So I'll refer to the pitfalls in this. So let's clarify the question. Pitfalls in the storage environment, or pitfall in the review process?
Pitfalls in the review process. Sorry, the clarification came in.
Got it. Okay. So I think the most dangerous aspect is that InfoSec teams and storage team do not speak the same language. One of the things you'd like to establish very early on is not only to educate InfoSec teams as to how storage environments are built and laid out and what are the capabilities, but also make sure that your storage team has basic security education and awareness. And it should come to terms. This is why it's so important to create those security baselines as to what are the standards required. So now when you have a common language, you can ask them questions for which you'll get intelligent questions. Did we separate roles from recovery and actual production volume? If they don't know what that means, And if you didn't cache that into specific baselines, the answer you'll get will be meaningless. So you'll say, did we secure storage? You'll say, sure. What level of confidence does it give you? So we really need to go into detail and create a contract in between the storage and backup teams and the InfoSec team and establish a common language. Once you do that, then the auditing process becomes much more detail-oriented and much more streamlined.
Thank you so much. This next question that dropped in from one of our attendees just now, just asking for some best practices here. How is the best way to stress test an organization's existing security system? Are there any best practices that you could share around that? And maybe how have you done that previously, if you're able to share that too?
Right. So I'd ask you to kindly repeat the question because I do have a slight echo problem. I lowered the volume. I'll bring it up. I didn't hear the question clearly.
Not a problem at all. Just asking, how is the best way to stress test an organization's existing security system, and how have you done that previously?
So stress testing storage environments could turn out to be a difficult task, right? Because usually the test environments are not separated from production. So most of the environments we've been helping audit and prepare and improve mostly relied both on actual rigorous collection of configuration data and tabletop assessments. Now, of course, you can and you should test recovery, but that's not stress testing. You'll probably do that in a recovery environment. You'll stand up, and you should do that as often as possible.
Thank you so much. Another quick question that dropped in here, just asking if, in your experience, you've used backups that claim immutable to ransomware. Any experience with restoring data?
Yeah. So I just want to caution you against falling victim or falling in love with the technology itself. Immutable storage is an awesome technology that needs to be set up correctly. Having said that, right, so in too many environments, you'll find that people set up immutable storage, let's say with flexible retention policies, right? So when you want to keep data for up to 6 months and a certain frequency and density of copies, and you don't really audit and make sure that it's not being exploited. As a hacker, what I can do is maybe generate time warp attacks. Let's say your time servers are not hardened, or you didn't even set up redundant time servers on your storage environments. So I can do that to accelerate time passage and actually delete all of your copies. So I'm just saying that, or providing that as an example to impress upon you that these technologies will prevent attackers from deleting copies, but you really have to understand how to set them up and actually audit periodically that they are set up correctly. And the other aspect of immutable storage, I mentioned that when you talked about poisoning, is that it's only as good as its integration with the backup environment. If I can convince your backup clients to pour garbage data into immutable storage, then you have immutable garbage, right? So you really need to take a holistic approach and analyze the entire supply chain of backup, from the clients, from the data sets that are being backed up, to the backup system that actually is configured to utilize immutable storage, to the actual systems themselves, and see that they're set up in a secure way. So great technology, but it doesn't exempt you from actually analyzing the vulnerabilities and setting up your security baselines.
Thank you so much. And there's a question I want to squeeze in before we do start winding down here this afternoon. Just asking, or just saying rather, you mentioned a number of ways in which data can be compromised. Are you finding that there's one way becoming more common than the others?
So I think attacks on NAS devices and backup tools are quite common these days. if we were to have this conversation like a year ago, I would say that it's still not happening. But this is an evolving technological landscape. The attack technologies out there gets more and more sophisticated. Now, as it relates to data tampering, we see relatively little evidence that the mass organized ransomware criminals will utilize those techniques. But we do know that such attacks were devised by nation states against financial organizations. So it's absolutely possible to corrupt your data under the radar through the storage plane. And we did get evidence that that happens sporadically. So my concern is that it will at a certain point in time becomes a common knowledge. And that will open the path for attackers to ask themselves, when they do get access to your back end, whether they should actually demand ransom, or maybe they can make much more money by utilizing whatever means they have to start changing your ecosystems and turning you into the next SolarWind. Even if you're a bank, you probably have a mobile app. What if someone can alter your source code environment and make sure all of your customers become their victims? It may be much more profitable for them to never let you know they're in, but actually tamper with your data. So to cap that, we don't really see the mass adversary community utilize data tampering, but we do see that as a real concern when it comes to defending against nation states and the cyber terrorists.
Thank you so much. And really, with the time that we've got left remaining, I just wanted to ask our speakers if there were any key takeaways, any final thoughts that they hadn't already mentioned. Doron, P, we'll start with yourself. Any key takeaways? Yeah. And then Doron Y, if you've got anything to add afterwards.
Yeah, so just to recap, so your storage and backup systems are the last line of defense. If you do get attacked, these are what will help you recover. And given the huge business value of data and the success of ransomware, there is clearly a gap in the industry preparedness. There is a conceptual gap where organizations do not necessarily assign the right priority to securing the data assets. There is a knowledge gap where InfoSec teams don't understand enough about storage, and storage teams do not understand enough about security. There's maybe even an organizational gap where the definition or the fine line between different owners is not crisply defined, and potentially even a process and a methodology gap. And on the bright side, we do have resources out there like the NIST guide, and there are common publications from SNIA and ISO. And that organizations have dealt with similar challenges in other areas of InfoSec, right? So this is definitely something we can solve.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doron. Anything to add?
Very briefly, echoing Doron P's words, I would encourage everyone to go to our website. There's a lot of really good resources on the website, practical best practice guides, white papers, videos, etc., that can really give you a helping hand. So that's my final word.
Thank you so much. Just wanted to reiterate that there is a white paper available as well, courtesy of Continuity and our pair of panelists. You just need to click the handouts tab that you'll see, and you'll be able to download that there. But that is all we have time for today, everyone. Just want to thank our sponsor once again, Continuity, as well as our speakers for their assistance in preparation for today's program. Of course, a massive thank you to our attendees tuning in today as well. A couple of quick reminders before we wrap things up. First, if you did have a question that we didn't have time for, you can reach out to our sponsor and their speakers directly with the information both found on screen and within the written materials. If you are collecting continuing education credit, you just need to click the blue button on the event homepage, enter the 3 secret words that were read earlier, and that will serve as your proof of attendance mandated by the various state bars and boards. Certificates of attendance can be accessed via the website using the account page or on the Knowledge Group app. And the link to the quiz is also being posted in the events chat window now. But don't forget to complete our feedback quiz as well, so we can make the best use of your time at future webcasts. And finally, if there are any questions related to anything I've mentioned today, feel free to send us an email. info@theknowledgegroup.org is that email address you need once again, and a member of the team will get back to you. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for the latest news and event information, and hear what our speakers intend to cover at future Knowledge Group webcasts with our Knowledge Group podcast, and you can get that on both iTunes and SoundCloud. So for today, that concludes our webcast, Storage and Backup Security, the Final Frontier, Threat Landscape, Industry Readiness, and Practical Advice. And on behalf of Doron, and Continuity, as well as the entire team here at the Knowledge Group, including myself, we hope you've enjoyed today's webcast. Look forward to seeing you at the next one, whenever that may be. And until next time, take care and bye for now.